You found the Backup Wrap Up, your go to podcast for all things backup, recovery, and cyber recovery. In this episode, we tackle the critical topic of incident response plans. Once again, we've brought our resident cyber expert, Dr. Mike Saylor from Black Swan Security, who starts by defining what an IR plan is and how it's different from DR and BC plans. We then talk about how you need different kind of response plans for different kinds of incidents, like a cyber attack versus a failed RAID array. We also delve into RACI diagrams and how they define who is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed on any incidents. Then we dig into where this plan should live and how you should make sure you have access to it and the bad guys don't. This is a packed episode I think you're going to really like. By the way, if you don't know who I am, I'm W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I've been passionate about this topic for over 30 years, ever since I had to tell my boss that our production database was toast and there were no backups of it. I don't want that to happen to you or anybody, and that's why I do this. On this podcast, we turn unappreciated backup admins into cyber recovery heroes. This is the Backup Wrap Up. Welcome to the show. If I can ask you for just a quick second to go press subscribe or follow so that you'll always be able to get our content, that would be great. I am W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I have with me a guy who keeps trying to get me to watch this weird new version of The Lord of the Rings, Persona Maliandi.
Yes, and you still have not seen it. Although I did, so my parents. So what I'm referring to is there's this new. It's not even a Bollywood movie. I think it's technically a Telugu movie, so Tollywood, but it is called Kalki AD 2398 or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's supposed to be, yes, very fantasy oriented, supposed to be really good, shot in the modern day era, or actually in the future, and it has some pretty famous actors. So from both the Telugu scene and the Tamil, and also from Hindi cinema. So pretty much an all-star cast. But I've been asking you. My parents actually went and saw it. They said it was like 3.5 hours and it was really long. But that might be like a couple naps. Yeah, but it might be a couple naps for you. But it's only one episode or one movie. I've been also trying to get you to watch Bahubali 1 and 2, or the beginning and the conclusion,
That's the
on
Lord of the
Netflix.
Rings one I was talking about, though.
Okay.
Isn't it?
Oh, that's. Yeah. Oh, you're right. That
And
is
that's
the
like
Lord of the Rings one.
And that's like 7 hours. That's like
That's
7
six.
hours long.
That's 6 hours. But my wife and I, we did watch it yesterday or over the weekend, and so it's fine. And it's really good, though, Curtis. You should watch it. You have until August 6th.
Okay, so as of this recording, I have 1 week to watch it.
Yes.
All right. Well, we have with us again our can we call you our resident cybersecurity expert?
I feel like I feel like I do reside here now.
I think so. We've done enough episodes. So the CEO of Black Swan Security, Mike Saylor, welcome to the show once again.
Thanks, guys. Great to be here.
So this week we talk a lot about this. It comes up a lot, in shows, and everybody says you need a response plan, right? And, an incident response plan. And some people talk about a ransomware response plan, a cybersecurity response plan, an incident response plan. Can you just help define all of those? Like what, do they fit? And of course I talk about a disaster recovery plan. Where are these like Russian nesting dolls?
Well, and what's an incident response plan to start with?
Well, and they are Russian nesting dolls. So an incident response plan is, what are you going to do in the event that an event occurs that you then classify as an incident? And so first part of an incident response plan is, how do I do that?
Wait, You got to define the difference then if you're going to
Yeah.
use that event and incident.
That's where I'm going. So the
Oh,
first
okay,
part
okay,
is
okay.
the first part of your incident response plan is how do I intake an event report? Could
Mhm.
be smoke. It could be my computer's acting weird. It could be the website's down. And then how do I classify that event as a type of incident? And then as a type of incident, what level of incident is it? 1, 2, 3, or however your organization classifies things. And so the first part is that analysis and categorization of an event into an incident and an incident type and criticality.
Right.
All right. So
And
then you have an incident.
go ahead.
So then you have an incident, and based on what that incident type is, you would have what's called a playbook. And so that playbook could be ransomware. That playbook could be denial of service. The website's down. Operational, outage type of playbook, or it could be misconduct. Employee misconduct. They're trying to access stuff they shouldn't. Unauthorized access type playbook. And you didn't you would do an analysis of your organization's most likely threats and build playbooks based on those.
And then playbooks are, like we've talked about in the past, just sort of everything documented. Hey, if this happens, here's all the people involved. Here's all the steps that everyone takes. Here's who's responsible for what actions. Here's who I have to talk to, and all the rest of that, right? And here's who needs to be informed.
Right, at least an outline. Something's
Yeah.
better than nothing. And then back to Curtis's question about disaster recovery and how does incident response plan. It is nested because an event becomes an incident, and an incident can then become a disaster.
Because essentially, you have a DR run book, right? Or a play, you're saying playbook, playbook, run book, same thing to you? Yeah.
It
Okay.
is.
So, I think about it a bit like programming, where DR runbook is a function, is a library that can be called by the bigger program, right? So that to me is like the deepest nested part, right? Because only after we've had an incident, we've classified it an incident, we've classified it as a cybersecurity incident, we've classified it as it's a ransomware event, and it's a ransomware event that needs restore, right? Now and then we have done our preparatory steps that we need to do, because I talk about a lot about this a lot, and that is one of the big differences between a disaster recovery response and a ransomware response is that almost always the disaster is over, right? The flood has receded, because you can't start your recovery until the flood has receded. The winds have stopped. The earthquake is over. The fire has been put out. Whatever the disaster was, it's over. Call the DR person. The big difference with a cyber event is that the attack is ongoing, and you've got to put that fire out, to use that analogy, before you can ever call the DR person. And that's why I'm saying it's sort of the most nested within the nesting dolls. What do you think of that comment?
Completely agree. And just to add a level of complexity with regard to backups, during your incident response, if it's a ransomware where there's some compromise that happened that led to the ransomware, then you've got to make sure then also that the backups you're restoring don't also include the compromise that you're trying to tie
Correct.
off.
Correct.
Yeah. So there's a
Correct.
lot more attention to detail and analysis during an incident than for sure than cleaning up after a disaster.
So you have these. So you said you take the event, you identify it, you put it into the right bucket of incidences, and then you put a severity alongside it, and then you just sort of execute your incident response plan. Now, are these like, I'm sure it's hard to cover every single incident and severity or priority, right? That goes alongside it. So how do you sort of decide like which ones am I actually going to create an incident response plan for? Which ones do I not need to? Because it all comes down to like resources in the company, right?
It does, and that's where you're going to start. So in your incident response plan, and this goes kind of back to the left a little bit and understanding the business and the way it operates and how technology supports the business and all the critical components of where the business revenue and focus is. Uh, Create an inventory of your resources, both on the IT side. We should already have that, especially from a disaster recovery perspective. And I'll add this comment too: if you have a mature disaster recovery plan, then a lot of the work that you're going to put into creating your incident response plan should have already been done. I've got an inventory of all our IT assets and where our data is and the SLAs for, if this machine's offline for an hour, we lost $1 million type of thing. Well, then, and the resources we need to address those disaster recovery activities, like who owns that system, who's our network administrator, who's our Active Directory, who's our website. You should know who all those subject matter experts and stakeholders and owners are, both on the IT side and the business side, right? So understanding um, that environment of resources is critical to being successful in incident response. All right. Well, then to your question about we can't possibly have a playbook for everything, but what you'll learn, especially after you do your first playbook and your first tabletop exercise, is that there are very common elements of every incident response. You've got a leader that that understands the environment, knows how to categorize an event appropriately, and then from that categorization of incident and priority can assemble the right people from this inventory of resources to be effective at responding to that incident. If it's ransomware, it's kind of an all hands on deck thing. But if the website's down, I already know I can look up who to call.
Yeah.
I need our
Right.
ISP, our hosting site, the person that wrote the website, the person that knows all the back end systems that support the website. I've got all that hammered out, and we'll get on a call, and I've got their phone number and their email and where they live and account numbers and all that stuff.
So you
So
don't have to
understand
basically cry wolf every single time.
you don't, and you should not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when an incident happens or an event happens, and you're like, this is a true incident, you don't go push the button. You call the next person and get some feedback and some collaboration. And then you start to expand the team as necessary. You don't call everybody to the table for every incident.
And I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I just want to, when you said that a lot of the work would have already been done if you have a DR plan, that's great. If you don't have one, that's not good. But but I want to say that if this is the first time you're doing any of this kind of work, the really key first thing is the BIA, right? It's like, because as nerds, as IT people, we very often we focus immediately on the cyber aspect or the recovery aspect or the backup aspect, and how are we going to get our network up. Okay, we need to figure out what actually matters, right? What makes the company money, what's going to cost the company money when it's down, right? What are things that we can do without, and how long can we do without them? How much money are we losing when this part of the company is down, right? And when this part of the company is down, is there something else that the people that work on that part of the company can do to continue to make money for the company? Or do we just send them home, so they're not twiddling their thumbs?
And Curtis, when you said BIA, you meant business impact assessment, correct?
Thank you. What do you
That's
think,
right.
Mike? Any
And
additional comments there?
absolutely. And so the BIA is valuable in so many ways. BIA will help you on your insurance. It helps you on your business continuity, your disaster recovery, your incident response. all your risk assessments. It's very critical, and any due diligence for like acquisitions and mergers and all that stuff. It's very critical. It's also a good tool for process improvement and overhead analysis. It's really good. Well, then to touch on something you mentioned, if this incident or if this event happens and people can't do their work and you send them home, or what else could they be doing? That also touches on business continuity. So how do we keep running the business without technology, which is really what disaster recovery focuses on? Business continuity
Mhm.
is that contingency plan for, I can't use the phone anymore, or that system's down, and now we've got to revert to pen and paper. And how do I keep taking orders or scheduling repairs or whatever the case might be?
Like
Somebody go find
Curtis's
a big box
medical.
of carbon paper.
Yeah, like Curtis's doctor's
Oh,
office, or that
yeah,
derecho that happened in the Midwest summer. Remember that episode, Curtis?
yeah, the derecho. Yeah, that's a great episode. We did have somebody on here who lived in a place and they experienced a derecho. Have you ever even heard of a derecho?
I've heard
Yeah,
the term, but I don't. I'm
yeah.
assuming it's a
It
type of
just means
rain.
a hurricane that forms over land.
Hmm.
Don't have any idea why it's called what it's called, but that's what it's called. Um, so yeah, so we've done our business impact analysis. We know all the parts. We know the we know where to focus our efforts, and then we need to focus on the things that are likely to happen, the things that are likely to give us the biggest impact. And Prasanna, you talked about, we can't do everything. We talk a lot on here about good, better, best, right? Good is to have something, to have some kind of outline for anything. If you have nothing, anything is better. It's better than nothing.
On a back of a
um
napkin is fine too.
yeah, yeah. um and if you've got nothing, once you've done the impact analysis and you've decided on, we're going to focus on, I think it wouldn't be crazy to say we're going to focus on a ransomware event that takes out our, you know priority one servers. What would be your next step?
Well, I'll add some color to that scenario, because part of your analysis may indicate that in the event of an incident like that, you cannot reallocate people. Those people have to keep doing whatever it is they're doing. So your
Mm,
incident response plan should identify resources that you can bring in to augment your staff and address the incident, or vice versa. Maybe it's your full-time people addressing the incident, but then you need to bring in staff, some contractors to continue daily operations or whatever that is, or that you've got zero capability of responding to that incident and you've got to bring in a third party 100% to support, and you're just providing them guidance or oversight. And I mean, it's kind of like the the flood response, the Blackman Mooring or whoever it is,
yep, yep.
where you've got a flood. I don't know how to clean up a flood or respond to a flood. I may know where the water shutoff valve is, but 100% of that response is going to be some third party. And so that business impact analysis is going to help you determine what proportion of inside outside, extra help you're going to need and who's going to do what. All right, so then the event happens, and you're gonna use that resource playbook, depending on what that event is, uh, to bring in the right resources, the right people, and start managing that response.
So you'll have your playbook or your incident response plan. You've executed on it. You knew who the resources to pull in. I'm sure along the way, as you're going through this actual event, you probably see some gaps. Maybe you're probably fine tuning, tweaking, adjusting, adding to your incident response plan to update it. So the next time it happens, you're better prepared. I guess the one question I have is, environments change. We've always talked about it, right? New systems come on board, new sites come up, new applications get deployed, there are new threats out there. What sort of frequency should people be thinking about going and revisiting their incident response plans? Because it's not helpful if, say, today, right, you have an incident response plan for how to deal with telephone communications from like 30 years ago, right? So, how do you make sure that your plans are also up to date as the world changes, as your environment changes, and as the people change too?
Well, as a good practice, good governance would be reviewing all your policies, procedures, and plans at least once a year. But I'll caveat that with any significant change to your personnel, your environment, or the way your business operates should then dictate a review of all the things that support and not only support all of those things, but also support the response activity to any related incidents. So as often as it makes sense, but at least once a year.
Okay.
And I'll
So
add to that too that there's often two types of incident response plans. There's the very technical one with the playbooks and the contact information, the technical details. That's for the internal response team consumption. And then there's kind of a general population incident response plan, which is more like a guide to, well, how do I report stuff and what do I expect? And
mm,
you know, some that same plan may also include a provision that says you as an employee or contractor may be called upon as a subject matter expert to help respond to an incident. And
yep.
so putting all that stuff out there as far as expectations and guidance in a shorter, kind of condensed manual, similar to
Yeah.
disaster recovery. There's like your evacuation plan,
Yeah.
and then there's the true disaster recovery plan that has a lot more detail in it.
And I like the idea of, I think one of the most crucial elements, if not the very first element that goes into an IR or DR plan, is the contact list, right? Who do you call for what? Who's responsible for what?
Mhm.
What is Mike Saylor's cell phone number? To call, because he's our guy to bring in the case of scenario. And again, you have to update that information because that stuff changes all the time, right? Um,
and
and
and don't and don't
Yep.
just Google Mike and his cell phone number and put it in your contact list. Actually, you've got to call these people and say
Yeah.
hello,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
we need to establish a relationship or a rapport so that you will answer the phone when I call you,
Yeah.
and know that
Yeah.
it's important.
Yeah, because I don't answer unknown phone numbers. So yeah.
Same. Yep.
Um, yeah, so we've got our contact list, we've got our vendor list, right? We've got our all of the technologies that are involved. Um, and we've got an escalation list, right? A list of who's going to be called when, and then also who's going to be called when those people don't answer the phone. Right? Because I know that comes up in a like in a tabletop. Well, it comes up all the time, right? uh, Fred, who's the one that's responsible for ABC, he's on vacation, right? He's in Aruba. Good for Fred. And he's taking an actual vacation and he's unplugged the cell phone and he's not taking our calls. So who's going to take Fred's call when Fred's not there? That should be the case for every responsibility in the company, right?
Correct. And you should have a chart. And if you remember from a previous episode, we call that a racy diagram,
That's right.
uh,
Yeah.
or a racy matrix.
And spell that out again.
RACI,
Yeah,
responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. And so for
absolutely.
everybody on your response team, you would indicate, and sometimes that changes based on what the playbook is. But who are your primary responsible, accountable people for all the different types of incidents that you include in your response plan?
Prasanna is the first person I call when I need to do something that I don't know how to do because I have this feeling that he knows. He's watched a YouTube video about how to do it. What, does that seem reasonable, Prasanna?
By
he
97% accurate, I would say.
he he watches a lot of YouTube videos. Um, All right. So we have our list, our contact list. We have the actual procedures, the actual run books that are, the different things that we're going to do. Is there anything else that needs to go into a response plan?
So at the end of your response plan, you should have as much reference material as you think is necessary. So there's your incident response team contact list, but down at the bottom, kind of to your point of third parties, but more than just name and phone number, you may need an account number or a policy number or something specific, a PIN. If there's multi-factor, and then something at the end. Towards the end, we have. I typically suggest appendices, and so one of the escalation points of an incident is whether or not it was a breach.
Hmm.
And the difference between incident and
Yeah.
breach can be significant for a lot of different reasons. Well, you can get sued over a breach, right? A breach might require that you have
Notified.
reporting obligations to the state or what have you. So there's usually an appendix that helps you walk through kind of a decision tree to determine if an incident was a breach. Well, then we've got all of this. Maybe especially if you're a publicly traded company, what are your reporting requirements
Mm.
by state, by statute, and then some things that you want to pre-negotiate is with, and this is with like management and legal or HR, how do we communicate different types of incidents internally and externally? And so having those predefined templates for emails or phone calls already in your plan, so you're not on the phone for an hour negotiating with internal audit or legal about, all right, how are we going to say this? You've got all that stuff out of the way.
So, Mike, so we have everything documented. I think one thing we didn't cover is, where does this document live?
Oh, that's
Because
a good
right,
question.
if it's like on your normal internal systems and you get hit with a ransomware attack, now your incident response plans are also potentially gone. If you get hit by a hurricane or a flood and you have it in physical paper form in the site location, those are probably gone. So how do people store these and make sure it's still accessible?
I've seen a lot of variations of this. I've seen the, all right, whose turn is it to take the metal box home in the trunk of their car? I've seen people store it with their tapes at Iron Mountain. I've seen people pay for a service where it's like a cloud-based disaster recovery thing where different stakeholders have the ability to log in and update their stuff, and that's where the plan lives.
Hmm.
And then I've also seen some pretty creative approaches to this with like $0 retainers with a law firm. And so pre-negotiate, get all the paperwork out of the way. And I would suggest this with an instant response firm, and even if your staff isn't capable of quickly fixing or building or reimaging stuff, then go find a firm that can provide you those resources and get all the paperwork done today. And but to my point, or back to my point about the law firm, so $0 retainer establishes, and it gets all the deconfliction out of the way. But give them your DR and incident response plan, and because you're going to call them anyway,
Right.
make sure that you've got their phone numbers. But it's great point. I've seen in a lot of cases where there's an incident, we're trying to coordinate response, and their internet's down, their emails down, and how do we even coordinate among their response team? And so having a relationship with someone that can provide you that communications medium, but also be a good place to keep your plan.
And
Yeah, I my personal preference is I like having an electronic version because it's easier to maintain, but I also like having that paper version. And the way I like creating a paper version is in a loose leaf type of a notebook. So that allows me, when I update a couple of pages, I can just rip out those pages and replace those pages so that I'm not printing an entire tree of documentation every time I go to update the run book. And I do like that idea of having it stored somewhere else other than the company, but close by, right? If we're talking
Mhm.
about actual paper, it needs, you talked about a law firm, you talked about an instant response team, somewhere that stuff is stored that's accessible to us as a company, but not too accessible because it's in the data center that we're trying to recover.
or at least a
Um,
copy, right? Store it somewhere
yeah,
else.
a copy. Yeah. Of course, the more copies you have, the more trouble you have maintaining those copies, right? But the and I think the physical paper issue is less of an issue during a cybersecurity event than it is in a disaster where the building blew up or is on fire. But I cannot overstate the value of um, of a paper document, right? In an event that potentially takes out your everything that you have, right? I'm a huge fan of the cloud, putting stuff in the cloud. What if you got no internet? Right? Clouds great.
Good.
You can't see the clouds anymore.
Yep. Yep.
So they're switching topics. So we have the cybersecurity incident response plan, which for a company documents who all the people are, how they respond, and all the rest. This is a gold mine for malicious actors, right? So if they got their hands on this, right, they know your entire playbook. It's like if you got the military plans for like the nuclear weapons and like how things will respond, right? So how like how should people go about protecting these from these bad actors?
So it should be considered or classified as a confidential or sensitive document. So password protected, and make sure it's stored appropriately with restricted access. But you're right. In fact, we did a tabletop exercise on ransomware for an engineering company. And then shortly after the tabletop, they actually had a ransomware attack. Come to find out, the threat actors had been in that environment for 6 months,
Oof.
were actually privy to the tabletop exercise and had access to their instant response plan and their insurance policies and all these other things, which then helped them better strategize and facilitate the attack. And they got paid. They made several $1 million off of that deal because they were informed.
Yeah.
And they knew what the capabilities were. They knew that they were going to be ineffective at responding to a ransomware attack, which then lends
Yeah.
itself to sure that you fix all the problems identified in a tabletop exercise. And this organization did not.
Well, I think that's a great question, Prasan. And I think it goes back to the same thing that we advise for backup systems segregation, right? Making sure that it's just not on the same systems with the same usernames and passwords, protected by Active Directory and an Active Directory admin password, right? It's got to be more than that, and I think that's where SaaS providers can be very helpful, right? I like this idea, that you talked about, Mike, of having basically services that they probably have templates and things that you can use for an incident response plan and help build it out. It makes making that easier. And then also it's stored in a different environment than yours. Of course, you got to vet all their security because, Persona, you are 100% right that would be a gold mine. Just like backup systems are a gold mine. You get in charge of the backup system, and you have why hack all the servers when I can just restore the data that I want, right? Any final thoughts, Mike? Any final things we need to say about creating an incident response plan?
Yes. The design of that plan will drive its effectiveness. And so, from an audit perspective, even more fundamentally, controls perspective, an incident response plan or program would be considered a control that helps drive the effectiveness of your organization. There's two parts of a control. There's the design of the control, and then there's the operational effectiveness of a control. And so we can put this plan together. We can have all these whiteboarding sessions and phone calls about who's doing what, and we put it all in this document and we feel great about it. But it doesn't mean a thing if you don't walk through it to see how effective that design is. And that's you have to do an exercise to test the effectiveness of your plan. Because like Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until I hit them. So your response plan that's all it is a plan until you get hit. And if you haven't walked through it, you're not going to know how well you respond to that hit.
Yeah, I really thought you were going to rhyme earlier. You something. I forgot what you said. It's you don't got that thing or something. I thought you were going to rhyme there, but yeah, I thought exactly about that.
Right.
That Mike Tyson comment. Everybody got to play until they get hit in the face. Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks again, Mike, for walking us through.
Anytime.
And thanks again for some great questions this time, Prasanna.
I think I'm starting to think more like a bad actor, which is kind of fun.
That's what you got to do, right? You got to think like a bad actor. Absolutely.
Dude.
All right. And thanks to our listeners. We do this for you. Reach out to us. Say hi. Go to backuprapup.com and put in a comment. I love getting comments from people. And rate us. Go, if you love us, rate us. If you hate us, don't. Anyway, that is a wrap. The Backup Wrap-Up is written, recorded, and produced by me, W. Curtis Preston. If you need backup or DR consulting, content generation, or expert witness work, check out backupcentral.com. You can also find links for my O'Reilly books on the same website. Remember, this is an independent podcast, and any opinions that you hear are those of the speaker and not necessarily an employer. Thanks for listening.